So welcome everybody. Let's get our first round of applause for Will Alexander, man. We're in for the intergalactic treat. So how this is gonna go after I give a quick intro, Will's gonna read, then we'll have a Q&A that you all will also be prompted to participate in, so start writing your questions now, get them ready. And yeah, and then it'll be back to the grapes and whatever else floats your boat. Will Alexander has been a great friend to me, and a great friend or confidant to the divine and proletariat, even anarchistic geometries of consciousness. And may he be a foreigner forever against a ruling class cartography of obligatory handshakes and bourgeois pen gestures. Peculiar praise, maze-like and self-inflicted and social arrangement. In divine blue light, here is a boatman for train, a sphinx to guard our grandmother's flat headstones, a spear edge, a safety for my child. Wave at the true selves in attendance, at the piano keys becoming selves, then Orisha's water a mirror, come sit a while. Like launching an army from our grandmother's grass markers, Will can look over a piano and play. Motifs like so many chimes in a Mississippi or a Berkeley, the right side of power being a mile ago, the right side of voiced matter. As she knows it's me. Sorry, that's my little partner in crime back there. Son Carr is now on the record. Coincidentally, the symmetry of infants and their metaphors, explaining that there is so much noise and beauty, especially on the outset of an upbringing or preparation of a poem, a key gaining mannerisms, like talking into missile sleeves. Will relays the poem, the yawn to Damascus, Focal Museum making, river in a medicine pouch, pendant of a tent, refractions running. Knowledge of the holy will get you through the commune part of the revolution and the meditation part of it as well. Giving ceremony costumes to whispers, giving the dear reader a change of plan. History moves poor people too, and our very own voices come and visit us. Our resolvable frustrations of a softer light stream in which the eye is also beautiful underbelly sometimes, and even unjoined has a song to play, stilling entertainment, riot scenes on our backpack fabric, symbols of relief and forgiveness, risking our senses for the ironies of language, the feeling that God only moves through the smallest beings, or community theater about the rebirth of quantum mechanics in blue. Picture scholarship in a briar patch, tricksters warning that even nature will have a quitting time. And as we write in a time where children are charming and brilliant before they are killed, and God dies there too, running among them, white consciousness whistling towards heavily populated ground, as we sit here writing, trying to put spirits into empty chairs and imagine them relaxing, resting cheekbones on red clay fingers, where the ear is just a melting pot for various graphs of mass murder, Will reminds us that we cannot be writers of control, but rather a new way the world breathes and pushes sounds through new flesh, nebula husbandry, front row taking bets on the bourgeois gaze, fiery and moribund. And we are the tougher cousins from the solitude yards of the West and rights of return. Ultimately, Will Alexander is a writer whose description defies my talent, but not my urgency in employing all and all ages to come, to mingle your mind with one of the greatest travelers, to relate in ink his divine curiosity. Without furtherness, Will Alexander.
First of all, I want to thank you all for attending this evening, and for sure for Mr. Tongo Eisen-Martin for introducing my presence. And I want to thank, above all, the presence of poetry in my life that has, saved me. Bud Powell once said, someone asked Bud, why didn't he do something else? He says, this is all I know, playing the piano. So this is all I know. And I'm writing, and writing for my life as we speak. So to thank you once again, and to start to enunciate poetically, this is a poem that came out in the Best American Poetry of 2023. And one of my themes this evening, my central theme this evening will be the heavens. And I was so fortunate to have contact with Dr. Loeb yesterday and had a great conversation. And this is par for the course, because when I was 9 years old, I found this book that was turned around on the cover. It was misprinted on the cover, but on the inside was about the heavens. I was 9 years old, and I drifted from that age into American sports, but somehow the two have conjoined in my psyche, my presence, in terms of stamina, dexterity, all of those things, balance, all those things come out in poetry. In American culture, things are seemingly separated, but once your mind gets working, your alchemy gets working, you understand that balances occur in life, and poetry is a balance. And so I'm going to start with this verbal balance. It came out in the Best American Poetry. It was first printed in New American Writing, and this is entitled The Bluish Mathematics of Darkness. Beyond calculation, beyond known cycles of the sun, non-measurable, not even a tenth of a billionth subdivided beyond the dawns. Its own space, then sable, colored space that implies orb-colored citron that pre-exist and vice versa, culls from the bluish mathematics of darkness. Alive as subdivided singularity, as exponential brilliance, a relay of ignition, as visible ray, as birds in untold advance of themselves, as fleeting motions flying beneath seeming waters on Titan, partially irradiated nuclei, beyond the farthest rural galaxies, slipping beyond the totalic Kelvin walls, far in advance of trans-Neptunian theology. It's one of my most interesting portions I've been looking at, just audibly imagining and working with the Oort clouds, timed in 1950 by Jean Oort. And this is so fascinating because we really don't know where the solar system ends. Supposedly, it's halfway towards Alpha Centauri, 4.3 light years away. But in that, there's those Oort clouds, I guess Pluto is the nearest personage. I call him a personage, but, kids are still fascinated about where's Pluto in the planetary realm, but it's part of the trans-Neptunian realm. And the trans-Neptunian realm has a lot of different characters like Eris and Maki-Maki. All of those areas are part of the trans-Neptunian clouds, but they go out much further. In fact, it's been speculated that there's a hidden sun in that region that we just cannot see. But this is the mystery of the cosmos itself. So what I wanted to do is read something from my former New Directions volume, Sri Lankan Loxodrome, because exploration is part of one's gift to explore. And to try to explore, I went into this poem, A Nexus of Phantoms. In a lorikeet cave, motions exist of disintegrated swans in a translocated lake brimming with harvested poisons, sealed by corruptive postmortems. Such swans, staggered by microbial reasoning, their aggressive nest, anatomical with anomaly, with drifts of incarnadine leanings, with a thirst which hurdles conspiratorial invasives, alive with coronal oceanics, open like a clouded trail of rendings. Analogous with the auks, the pelicans, the mergansers, perhaps with the petrels and the gannets, under the power of darted mocking orations. The swans, looking back on solemn blood perusal, like a form of death breaking roses on the shore. It is the example of phonograms, of lost and compacted lenses, turning within a charismatic fall line, or an isoneph, or what an avian would announce in Greenland as a katabatic wind. The swans, like a haze of magnetism or implied gondola locations, where the scent of each lorikeet is consumed and brought to dazzling eclipse refulgence. In another foci, in another depth, their form self-challenged in a cloak of suns, their power de-revealed with 7 moons burning, reduced to 2 intense incendiary magnets. And these incendiary magnets, like a nexus of phantoms, scattered across a geometric optometry. Excuse the electronic devices, but they're ever present in this world we're in. It's unfortunate, but fortunate at the same time. We're just in this movement of living. So, in this movement of living, one has Pirandello says, tonight we improvise. So I want to read some works from, a couple things from this new volume from Eastern Connecticut University. It's called Here. And I was fortunately included. And this is a poem that is not difficult to read, but I have to go through my paces with it. It's called Hyperspatial Rotation. Scripted according to the capacity of compound isolation, an evolutionary whirling of levels that translate to cellular blizzards that magically accrete as hyperstates, as impalpable caverns that rise and transmute consciousness. For the individual, these psychic cellular states cast transparent wattage that authors inscrutable singularity as pattern, alchemically contending with friction itself. This being a level where one can never be scripted as toneless cartographical blankness, but where communication plies with itself with endemic riverine telepathy, overarching fragmentation. One becomes attuned to a borderless grammar, at one with pouring psychic waves, sans ideology from compound ideology, that then persists as crystal light, charged with an interior kinetic that issues from rotating figures in the mind. They being none other than immanence, as stunning peripheral figures casting implausible wavelengths from shadow. They then emits aural emission from less direct planes that authors itself as optical neutrality, so as to hear via interior modes of thought that erupt as spectacular hybridity. You know, we in the general world, in particular the Occident, have only been mostly subscribed to the linear pattern of thinking. But because of being a poet, I was always convulsed by my natural tendency to my mind to rotate. And consequently, there was trouble with the general grading system. And, you know, this is something that's endemic to the general presence in the Occident. But, you know, fortunately, during my odyssey in this life, I've been able to come across a gentleman, you may or may not know about him. His name was Edward de Bono, the great inventor, thinker, medical person, who wrote this incredible book called Lateral Thinking. It's about exercises in thinking, where the linear idea is not the only way of assessing reality. But he has these exercises where one can go into these areas like a gift, like suspended judgment, where one doesn't take one's first initiation as a up and down, a yes or no. But one can absorb information and don't respond right away. One creates, for me, it was creating wisdom, because you're looking like you're making mistakes, but sometimes you have to understand that one is in a rotation all the time of the mind. And so as I turned my mind around, I was able to access areas of language where it didn't look like it was the same way all the time. It would shift, like the cosmos shifts. But it, never ideological, but it is for the moment that one is in. So for the poet, you got to be in that moment you're in and be open enough where the mind can whirl, where the whole idea of mistakes don't accrue. It's like the late, great trumpeter that worked in this general area years and years ago. His name was Booker Little, played with John Coltrane at one time, passed away at 23. But he said, as far as my hearing, there are no wrong notes. So for me, no wrong notes occur. And I'm not using that as a cop-out, but as an organic response to reality. And I'll read from some of the earlier work here. This is from one of my books from years ago called Above the Human Nerve Domain. To unlock predisposers in carbon, to cancel sleep as paretical drachma, not as transaxial summa or intense aboriginal invasive, but as promenade, as forgery by craft, as soiled apparitional anagram. Yes, a dark stochastic and wheat drain of its magic as drift, being boundary, being hellish invention as grasp. I'm thinking of aroused electrical blockage, of human monsoon killing as treaty, as breach, as strangled impulse by identity. I mean the psychic root which is stained by dialectical illness, by the thought contained in black ozonal mirrors, where general slaughter is reflected, where the mind impels its wits by bleak molecular isolation, by stunted mangrove withdrawal, by absence from the life of euphoric solar trees. Such promulgation imploded from the realms of a suicide foundry, of broken wisdom as diamond. It is an eon in a fallen snow in a well, an injudicious barrier gone awry, the ingrained Eurocentric example of the hatred of the darker integument with its combative belligerence against the core of volitional mystery. So what concerns me is a yoga which implodes the sun, which compounds its runics, the body then electric like a stunning sapphire serpent, with the arc of its cells alive as interior altar subspecies, as an eye of analogical waters. No longer of ennui, of the praxis of perfidious helium atrocity, extended by the vapor of betrayal by their dazed imperceptive in the molecules. Here, in such preternatural enclave, I swim in the murmur of sundogs, of kindle potentate spasms, like interior distillation from Moorish pre-Copernica. As if, at the height of Kemetic day, there existed the dauntless Sphinxian geometries, those pre-existent personas of lightning, no longer of the form of gravity as bastion, of lingering ammonia in the genes, but of absent chemical flaw, the body becoming the magic flight of a transmuted corium, of the blood of a bloodless liminal bell. And I'll read one other from this volume. It's called Provision for the Higher Ozone Body. A beaker of yeast on a phantom blood horizon, sustaining my stoma, my triangular body as hearth, while imbibing hyperphrenia in the void of a dusty electrical house. Alive in a vanished ozone square, like a magic hydrogen beast in a jewel, honing my priority to elevated ferret, to quantifiable opacity, in that I am able to hunt for trout in plentiful sucrose heat, in fiery ratios of bark, in gulfs of angry neutron data. Because I claim the fructose of flesh with splinters, I agree upon darkened chemical plans to take away sequentials, to reinforce the blood which ignites the omniscient smoke of ritual Cherokee spiders. Much like the power to secretly ingest hemp, to curiously spill water, feasting within the sands of alchemical Polynesias, within blazing stochastics, eating sheets of interior hawk, or anomalous dandelion lashings, or ice spun from cold cilantro chowders. Or say, I drank blood from a haphazard sparrow, or swallow peppers from a swirling Mongolian leper's nest. I'm linked to primordial kerosene example, to floods, to symbols of Assyrian hunting assemblage. Displaced and obsessed with contaminated grammar, which forfeits prophetic ore, or the force of Uranian cobalt fragments, I mellifluously rise into higher thermal assertion by placing intuitive stones around a sink of explosive shadows. I then re-engender the bottomless and make 2 or 3 bickerings of ice vanish into the source of Mexican agua. There then exists the eating of lions on behalf of alchemical hurricane bodies, on behalf of the higher levitational beryllium body, its claws, its emblems of eclectic butane and voltage. And it is this voltage by which one staggers like an amethyst fish, like a monstrous chaparral of limits on fire within that which annuls the lower gold to a higher state of buffeted emergence. As if, under the camouflage of cataracts, I were to dwell on glassy vertical soils, compelled by roaring anodyne volcanoes, every reason exists to impose my scrolls on blank omega warrens. Therefore, being able to breathe at living volational scale, Living as a spurious mirror must be emptied, must transcend the flaws in piacular bullocks, so that the bulk, the monorons, the chasms, will emit as oracular bounty, a salt, a displaced prince, capable of a laughs at the pitch of the transmuted ozone body. I'm always interested in language as transmutation. What do we have in this life? We have what we have, but to have the gift of language, I've ingested it to such a degree that it's allowing me to survive with a form of vigor. You know, like when athletes retire, sometimes they're broken down. And, you know, can you still walk? Can you still cast your shadow on a wall? But here, what happens in poetry, there's no longer quantity. I'm not imprisoned by quantity. How many books, or how large is the book? In fact, we're going to emit energy to you more through smaller poems tonight. Christina can understand that, you know, it's called my magnum opus. It's over 600 pages. I wouldn't dare attempt that kind of work. One thing about poetry is it's tricky. You never master it because it's an existential process. It is an existential process that one has to ingest and absorb over time. So one is not a performer, but one has a commitment to creating consciousness in the reader, in the listener. So it's a sharing of energy. So by doing this reading, I don't attempt perfection at all. In fact, I'm going to read a smaller work here. I'm so interested in astronomy. I'm so happy to talk to Dr. Loeb yesterday. And I'm just going to have a 2-line poem. It's called Bekudo, inoperable plane that sweeps inside the sun as survival. That's one of 5,000 exoplanets that's consistently being discovered right now. But this particular planet sweeps inside of its sun and survives. Not like Mercury going around the edges of the sun. This sweeps inside the sun right at its borders and continues to survive. It's part of the James Webb understanding. It's opening us up to other enigmas of reality, which is comparable to poets. So it's opened us up, to questioning the Big Bang, a lot of things that people need to question themselves. And what poets do all the time, I think I'm always asking myself about myself. Not in an egotistical way, but as a way of sharing reality, because one has to stay linguistically vulnerable to one's presence. One has never captured the presence, the higher arc, where one can look down and signal power from a plane of so-called brilliance. One is always struggling. And this is a small poem that appeared a few months ago in the New York Times. It's called Powerless Self-Judgment. The body as deserted burning witness, as ghost, as primeval leper, that attempts to lessen its own ruin by telepathic power beyond its states, as catastrophe, as catastrophic cretin in a judgment of itself, as toneless mirage being factored by phoneme, by nerveless adventure, as powerless stride that corroded its own apparition. These are difficult because I never practiced reading. I'll be honest with you, because it has to be done, for me, existentially. And one don't want to parade a kind of prescripted, I'll call it a prescripted molecule that one can be scientifically diagnosed. I don't even know. And so it contains a mystery that swallows up the listener too, where he or she is always engulfed by a certain kind of a mystery. And to always be certified by mystery is an elliptical challenge. This is called dark, perplexing balance. As to current psychic scripting being forum for hesitation, not a dazed phantom owl possessing body as brokered flint, pursuing moonlight via form as its own surcease, not as creatural surcease or negligence that barters its own levitation as calculus by systemic or brazen proportion or numerically exploded capacity, but as meta-yield, as it ignites from itself, as proportional hull or cinder, but as telepathic visitation, ascended above guttural imbalance, not as frictionless wafting, but enriched by dark, perplexing balance. One is always in struggle with existence. And the culture that we're in is always trying to magnetize us in this form of certainty, but we're never certain. We think we have more money, we have this, we have that. But what do we really have in the end? It's on this album, the memorial album about Eric Dolphy. It's a quote from Richard II. We have nothing other than death. So once one is working with that energy all the time, one can take chances naturally and work at a higher rhythm of oneself, going through the limits. That's what I so admire about Eric Dolphy, because he sacrificed his life to go beyond limits. And so I'm just always working to work on that level. And this is a poem I'm going to read now from this new volume that came to be from Isolari. This is a volume, Charismatic Spirals. It was founded in London, and it goes around the world. And this came in a very curious wave of energy, because the publisher, Sebastian Clark in London, got in touch with one of my source points lives in Berlin, Shane Anderson, and they consulted, and here's the book. That's how magic works. I just throw poems out on a bottle on a beach and let the waves bring it up on another shore, if it's in India or Sri Lanka. And this is called Living Cellular Ballet. A kind of chemical turquoise balanced, not as rigidified retraction, but as balanced colloquy with itself, blending with subdernal invisibility. So that kinetic circular vapor blends with its own dazzling vapor, as grammatical dazzling, sans the former as splendid subsisting as itself, as segmented motif, but as blinding dimensional motif, implying cryptic hesitation, extending beyond signals of complication, beyond moribund sums of blankness, as living cryptography into squared summa that plaises, as a formless form of nitrogen that summons, that blends into itself, so that psychic cataracts morph into blizzards that defy description, so that the psychic baffles as wizardry, as transparent optometry that circles inside its own optimum, implying balance, sans squared hiatus without partial script, for seeing without end. I think one has to see without end the script, because one is not an entertainer, but a scripting through this circle of, for me, of this intense, impregnated hesitation. It's regnant with hesitation. This is a piece called The Inhumanist Velocity. It's for one of my longtime comrades, Andrew Giron, lives in Berkeley. We've been working together for many years. Not a long poem. Blue eroded suns that eclipse their own innateness as madrigal at velocities that seem to repeal evolutionary essence, not simply concerning their own eruption, but as occulted force fields that renew their own occulted essence. We're in this occultation all the time. Even though I love astronomy, but what people are trying to do is create another Earth. It's any of you, some of you may know about the psychic experiments done at Pondicherry by Sri Aurobindo. He said that there's this, it's what the great Alan Sandage said about the cosmos. It's biogeopoetry. And this is where there's parts where we will never see the end of the universe. I don't understand, I don't care what kind of instrumentation you have. But you get right back to the first astronomers that only had the eye. And my goodness, we're in that poetic state. So I'm really into audition, or exploring by audition into the cosmos. So what I'm doing here is going to affirming primeval phantom. And this is the next poem. Affirming risk, affirming bold, suggestive riddles, advanced beyond themselves, beyond their adventure to circulate as plural cartography that explodes, that commingles diacritics with various codes of its own absence, not as dolorous absence or compound entrapment that ignites blizzards of outreach, that thrives and circulates this primeval phantom. Once one gets into a habit of, I should say an exercise of writing, a lot of people just want to stay put. But, as I learned from Julio Cortázar, that one should never stay put. One should continue to move and circulate and advance. One is never perfect. One has to not work with that form of hallucination, but to get over the hallucination, to get into uncharted territory. So that's what I've been doing with this poetry here, and I do all the time. And these are short poems because I've been writing much longer pieces across time and space, from one of my first volumes about painting. I can't think, I have so many poems, I can't think of them all. But I don't want to come up with an idea of, I got to know this, I got to know that. No, it was about painting. The first lines said, to paint is to make a mark of mirrors. And it's a quote from an energy inspired by the poet Raphael Alberti. So one draws from consciousness all over the spectrum of life. That's what poetry does. As myself and Christina were talking about Robert Frost, and I'm not a Frost person, but he made one statement that I always remember. He said, the poet is like with boots walking across a thorn field. You just pick something up all the time. So you're picking stuff up at bus terminals and stations of unrest across life. But the poetry is absorbing itself, even when you don't think it's absorbing. And so this is a difficult poem. I don't know how much time we have. I'm going to try to conclude with this poem. And I'll read portions of it. It's called The Sand Genie. And it's about the nuclear situation on this earth. And Noam Chomsky pointed out that people forget about the situation. A birthday date or an office adventure becomes paramount in someone's conversation. but we're always dealing with this threat. In fact, I was looking at the psychiatric volume that said people born after 1945 generally have the threat of the world always imploding. And, the advertising companies try to keep you off of the point, of concentrating. In fact, I found out that the toy companies have marked the age 4 as a point of maximum absorption for the consciousness to start involving oneself in the cartoon culture. So this is a little quote, and I'm going to read a few pages of this, not to continue stretching it out. This is called The Sand Genie, and I've never read it before. Brand new volume. Had I known that the Germans would not succeed in producing an atomic bomb, I would not have lifted a finger. Albert Einstein. On a scorched and usurious desert soil, born from the rise of excessive polar ash, he hails from summoned astral volcanoes, from prisms rarely known on terra firma, pictured as if to reduce and vilify, as if landed from sumptuous regions of discomfort. From squared minuses in hell, losing his balance in a rancid crater on the moon, projecting oniric comets which erupt from the sea. This being the eloquence of blazing, where fires assemble and swallow and translate forces, thereby understanding language that is haunted nuance, being spells of refrangible quintessence. Not unlike a concrescence of hyenas, fires from such living being unparalleled format, unprincipled foment, or terse, as curiously chronicled umbilical detritus coursing through seductive sand and amnesia. What does this sand genie envision as grammar? Eviscerated forest, chromosomal blankage, structureless light from the undimmed. He signals interactive carnage, this being fate that conceals himself as critical anemia, as momentary seed springing from perilous cinema, surpassing bitterness beyond pure causation. So is his power excess, electrical warping, or chronic ascent through electrical bohemias? First of all, the genie as synapse, as gelatinous cross wiring, as condoned intangible, as horrific navigation. Perhaps I could say that he is isle or perfect onyx vibration. And this onyx vibration being of blackened nettles and water, its kinetic mediae flooded with curious micro-haunting as it applies to collective human navamshas. The latter having been drained and turned to utter fabrication, which seems to utter through dissolving lunar instigation. Thus, he projects a misperceptive zodiac of the species mired by the error of grass, extensive assumption, summoned as they've been through radiation as ascent, this being the ground, this being how termites are brewed, of how insects are frayed, of how the soil is intrinsically forgotten. Within such a condition, even ghosts have lost their plenitude, have lost their optic arrival in the wake of primal solar leakage. At times, even the sun genie roars and transmixes his fevers and alerts his own sums to an overwhelming imminence of a dazzling that portends an absence of himself. I'll stop there because we want to contain the essence, and I don't want to get enamored of my own voice. So I really thank you guys for appearing and absorbing as much as you can. I think that everybody listening, don't think about knowing everything, but just absorbing. And so I thank you all. Thank you. We extend our conversation.
Yes.
That's great.
Man, where not to begin? What is an origin story or two of the life and times of Will Alexander?
Well, I was never supposed to be here, first of all. In this room with this audience, speaking with this gentleman here, but it came to be. And the poet has to go through all these arduous trials and tribulations just to get, you got to climb through wormholes verbally to get here. It's not easy, but here we are.
You have such a almost your grasp or absorption of kind of so many just kind of groovy fields of the human imagination really requires like an unrivaled selflessness that you carry yourself with. And I wonder how that evolved over time. Did it evolve over time? And if not, what was it like? You know what I mean? Walking with the kind of like the burden of egolessness in this so-called society. But how would you describe that walk?
I call it an alchemical walk. One doesn't have a script. One has to move in terms of the exponential I call it sub-clarities of the moment. One thing I say that poetry requires tremendous internal stamina. And as Sam Beckett says, I'll fail, I walk, I'll fall down, I get up. We'll get up and I'll try again. That's been my life. And Sam Beckett has been very essential in my understanding existentially. Mm-hmm. Not just so much socially, but it was merging me with a kind of an experience that I was going through and that I secretly carried across time and space.
Mm. Can you describe kind of these parents you had, these parents who launched you?
They would probably be glad I'm here today, but during the presence of growing up, it looked like I was like a non-starter because I always related to a Mr. Beacon who allowed me to learn my first reading, essential reading, when I was about 8 and a half years old. It was amazing. I was difficult. I was a slow starter, real slow starter, and my mom was concerned, and she had this consultation, and I just, like this old plant we used to have, it was a lemon tree. It never sprouted fruit until at a certain point it decided to sprout fruit. And that's the way I am. Sometimes it looks slow and non-structural, but it does work over time. And one has to, in other words, stick with oneself.
How did you relate to it? Did you feel a deficit or just kind of already understanding that you were operating a little outside or maybe a lot outside of people's regular scheduled engagement of reality?
I was, but at the time that it started, I didn't know it. And as I may have just mentioned in the reading, I found this astronomy book when I was 9 years old. And there I found this great book. It was mislabeled on the outside, but it was in a grammar school library. And I was able to say, this is something I can relate to, because it was getting me outside of the presence that I was in. And I just carried that as a part of my, I call it my subderma, where it was occulting in my system. It was an occultation in my system that I've carried across time and space, and the experiences were absorbing themselves unbeknownst of myself lingually. And it's absorbed lingually to such an extent that at a certain point, the match struck and the energy broke and the fire started to come out, seep out, I should say. But, one is never the way one's supposed to be a full-grown artist at, say, 10 years old. It takes a lot of maturation and a lot of failure and a lot of falling down and getting up and starting over again.
Do you ever feel, or have you felt a kind of a dominant path that you're on, and then the rest kind of serving it, or does that fluctuate?
It doesn't fluctuate. You evolve into it. For me, it evolved. I've never been what they call a lingual ideologist, but I found my way along. And when I found Andre Breton's works, the manifesto, I said, this struck a chord in me that I could follow. Certain people like Benjamin Perret and Anthony Norteau and M.S. Césaire, Bob Coffin, Philip Lamantia, who I was fortunate enough to meet and have an incredible discussion with, life-changing discussion. But it happened like in stages. It didn't happen as a protracted block of time, So I'm still moving forward,
I love your the way, you constantly reference friendship and influence. Can you kind of relate to us some actionable intel from some of these
encounters?
Yeah.
Well, I had many encounters, way out encounters, but as I developed, I got through some very dangerous moments. Very dangerous moments. I was involved with, like Sheikh Anta Diop, with I wouldn't say a radical periphery. It was an essential situation during that period. And I remember nothing happened in this night. I was walking behind the late Geronimo Pratt. And whoa, man, I thought I was gone that night. Nothing happened. But it wasn't because of him, because it was a situation that occurred that night. I said, this is a blessing from the gods. As Michelle Lee says, all of your experiences translate into poetry. Just stay. And that's the energy I was carrying. The danger or the uncertainty transmutes into poetry over time. And so, you take these life lessons. Like Joanne Monroe has been very important to me psychologically. Not just as a practitioner, but as a thinker. The Max Ernst, I think it was, that tried to hang mock execution of Monroe in 1929. Interesting. And he was a person that was never one or two words in a lifetime. He's very quiet. But he just continued to paint, During the war, he was continuing to paint. And when the war was over, he exhibited these incredible watercolors he was doing during that period. And it was a big revelation as it came in 1945 into New York. But you never lose faith in yourself. There's so many stories going on, but there was many of them.
You said that at 9 you got your hands on the astronomy book. Can we skip to the latest chapter That was yesterday when you spoke to the
Bobby
Dr.
Loeb.
Lowe. Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
amazing.
Or at least give us the translation. You know.
Man, that was amazing because to meet a person of that level that was.
They may not know who you met.
Bobby Loeb is the astronomer here at Harvard, and his world recognition, and he didn't carry that kind of presence with him. I was able to talk to him organically. You know, we were able to meet one of the persons in one of my books that I got coming out. It's Abu Said Sinjari. Now, anybody won't know, he was a precursor of Copernicus. And when I mentioned that name, he knew who I was speaking of. And by the way, this Sinjari implied this heliocentric sun system, I'd say about 500 years before Copernicus was born. So this is the kind of things I'm exploring, you know, search for the unknown for the sake of the unknown. You know, it's my métier across life. So even if no one's really following what, you know, the main script is, there's an opening there, and I've been able to explore the Islamic educational praxis. By the way, most people don't know that the university system in the West didn't exist in 942 and 1218 until 1,000 years ago, Muslims and Jews were collaborated on putting this system into balance at Oxford, at Salamanca, and you know, other places, Coimbra. These were the initial bastions in the West of learning. So it's been so divided over time and space. We've almost lost our balance at this time.
What are some other kind of current inquiries that you've been mulling over?
Well, it's jazz music has saved my life. And I was fortunate enough to not chase after people, but to meet Jackie McLean, the late Jackie McLean. And one night, I gave Jackie I knew he wrote a little bit on his albums, and I said, well, I'll give Jackie a book of mine, the Stratospheric Canticles. And he took a break from playing, and he came back reading the book to me. I said, wow, that was a great experience for me. Not unlike meeting Dr. Loeb yesterday. But it's that kind of, not as a fan, but as an absorption, being in the presence of meaningful people in your life. Most people waste so much time, you know, in life. It's not in me to waste time, to write books, but not to waste time. So here I am.
How do you kind of experience these dialogues, or even in your own study, you being so kind of far outside of the paradigms of capturing or owning knowledge? I wonder even if there's a kind of a different visceral operation.
It's I tell you what, a lot of strain goes into this effort. And I'm never feeling like I'm on top of anything. I'm always struggling with things. You know, I always relate to the great jazz musicians like John Coltrane, Eric Dolphy, always practicing, never feeling you have it all cornered. There's always exceptional beings that one can aspire to, like Coltrane, Dolphy, Ligeti, and Bela Bartok, people like that. They're inspirational. Sam Beckett himself. But it's that kind of thing, and it's an existential stride that one has to get into, and it's quite strenuous. It takes a lot of toll on the body. So I'm lucky to survive to this point.
Yeah. What are some lessons from Coltrane or Dolphy along with the kind of the never-ending search?
One, for me, I can only speak for myself, but I was able to feel that I never have, like I said earlier, control over this or that subject. As late Malcolm X says, I'm not an expert. I'm never an expert on anything. So, I'm always trying something new all the time. After my combustion cycle, I decided to not do the same thing over and write another big book. That's going to be it for now. So and let it go. Like you throw poetry out on the waters and let it wash up on the shore somewhere, and there will be listeners somewhere.
Do you have a prediction for where we are headed now, where kind of human history is moving?
We are in an interesting position. It's alchemical, but I'd say in a good way we're headed towards something I think better. It's kind of, as Lee Morgan used to have this title, growing pains. We're in this situation of real growing pains right now, and the newscasters talk about really titillating absolutes that don't really apply to the moment, but we're still growing and still going. If you told somebody this in a previous era, that we'd be where we're at now, they wouldn't believe you. About the jail sentences and the corruption and all the mass shootings of children and you name it. It's a horrifying list. But once one absorbs, as Alan Watts says, once one absorbs the torture that one is going through, he was talking about the middle-aged mystics. He says at a certain point of growth, one can continue to almost enjoy the torture, but survive the torture. And that's where we're at now, trying to survive this situation that's seemingly completely unbalanced.
Where do you, you just spoke a couple galaxies ago on and just kind of a color of your journey being a kind of I don't want to project anything onto it, but let's say like a kind of a discomfort with where the understanding is in that moment.
Yeah.
Do you also have kind of, even if it's brief periods of relief or maybe some kind of peace and or meditation? What is that, if so?
They come in odd moments. It's like traveling the desert and getting to an oasis where even the camel has to rest. And I work all the time. I'm always, sometimes, the exercise is sometimes in doubt of myself because of this or that. I just recently tried to let that go enough to continue to go forward because I had so much internal pressure I've been living with my whole life that it's hard for me to take tests in doctor's offices because it's really because of the internal pressure, and you can't explain it. You can't explain poetry to the outside, to the quotidian world. But that's where I'm really at. And I'm just lucky to have gotten to this moment and talking to you today.
Respect.
Yeah. So here we are.
Right. Do we have any questions?
These could be biographical,
Or also
cosmogonal,
yes.
metaphysical. This is okay. It's a weird question, but I think my friend was telling me that you've been reading Plotinus. Is this true?
I've read some, and I've really gotten into the, beyond Plotinus, I've been able to get to this the sources of the Egyptian psychic matrix.
Yes, yeah, I was just wondering
Yeah.
about his influence on your
Yeah.
poetry.
So that has brought up this region of the world, this well, I wouldn't say region of the world, this motion of the world that started in the Nile Valley for me, not as an ideological, but it's an essence. You know that I won't get too much into this, but the building of the first pyramids were done in the first 7 dynasties out of the Nubian Egyptian complex. And the Greeks didn't get to Egypt until around 332 BC, and the Romans didn't get there till 47 BC, give or take this or that year. But we're in a state where it's been overemphasized, the Roman and the Greek heritage, and Strada de Lubitz gets into this situation, about the pyramid building happened during the first 7 dynasties of the Egyptian situation. That's when all the mathematics and all the balances came into play. People should look at the whole script of the world universe, and that would help us to expand, So I'm thinking about the expansion, not of ideology, but the expansion of the human spirit.
Yeah, I was reading Across the Vapor Gulf during the pandemic, and I felt like it described in detail what was happening right outside my door.
Yeah.
And it was written like before. So I'm just wondering how that piece of work came to be. It's gorgeous, and the language is so, I don't know, I just felt this rapture.
Well, thank you for that, yeah. I work oddly. I work like bats, they fly off of sonar. Anybody ever seen a bat fly? I've seen one. I was lucky to see one fly. They are all over the place, but they always find balance. And I found the aphorism via E.M. Turan, who was a very, very right-wing leaning anti-Semitic individual. But I found some essences there. You got to find essences in life, It's not what's on the cover, but what's on the inside. And I found something there, and I thought at one point I would just become an aphorist. And then that's not my only book of aphorisms. There's more. But, I just got to a point where I was really at home in the aphorism. And, always be at home with what you're doing. Don't lurk in somebody else's shadow. Always lurk with your own presence. Lurk within your own presence. And it makes you fecund and not contradictory, but it blends. In other words, you blend with yourself. That's what experience does, I think, blending with yourself. Because I could have got off on a way off track. Because I grew up on the street that represented the first Watts Rebellion, 116th and Avalon. It's a long ways from Harvard. So, but I'm still absorbing, what I learned through that experience. And life is a circle. It's not a segment. Getting across into segments is an opacity. But to have a whole flow of blending, it's what creates, I think, poetry in the long run. It's never a hazard or a phase, but a lifelong possession. It's like a possession. It's like anybody know Bob Thompson, the great painter? So Bob Thompson was always looking for the next work. It was always in the work. So I've absorbed that kind of energy, always being absorbed by something all the time, 24 hours a day. And I don't mean that like in a metaphorical sense, but like it could be 3:30 in the afternoon or 2:30 in the evening or at night. Poetry is inopportune. It It doesn't work off of what used to be in prior times we call bourgeois suggestion. It's inappropriate. And I'm in a state where, things could come to me now and it'd be uncomfortable to write. So what I do, even when I'm driving, I've had poetry come to me at stop signs. And I always carry a pencil and paper, something to get the thought down so that I can extend it as I get to a more stable position in life. But in other words, one lives in a river of poetry all the time. A river of, I call it audition of hearing. It's about hearing. It's not about seeing. This is an optical culture, but the poet works with the auditory nerve. And that's what Blake said, that's what Bretonus pointed out. It's not an ideological situation, because Breton always talked about hearing. And when he talks about, in the first manifesto, he says, well, people says, Breton's so ideological, this and that, but he talked about Shakespeare and Jonathan Swift having that power. So it's just a power in life, like the heavens are part of a power in life. As Avi Loeb was saying, all cultures are always talking about, they have wars and misgivings and all of this, but they still look into the sky, into the heavens. In fact, the Dogon were doing this astronomical experiments with Sirius B. And I think it was, I wrote it in one of my books, about someone at one of the local colleges here that was upset that they knew this information at that time. And even Carl Sagan said some Jesuit scholar came down to give him this information. But no, it was an endemic situation. And so I'm an endemic kind of person, I'm not here to regale you with expertise, but try to answer questions.
You mentioned a little bit of your writing habit all the time, and even in the car and stuff like that. I wonder if you can make some remarks about your reading habits, how you go about it, because you seem to be so widely read and have such a wide interest. Mm-hmm. If you're methodical, or you just eat whole libraries over the course of time, and if you're reading with a notebook beside you and writing, or if you need time to process what you're reading. I'm just curious what your habits are with reading books.
Like De Bono talked about this circular method of thought. I just naturally fell into that because my mind is able to absorb on the fly almost. And I get this and that, and it just becomes endemic to my own habituation. And absorb it, and then it like seeps into my system, and then it comes out at odd moments. Like I said, at strange days in the afternoon or evening or morning. As I said once, it's like being in a river of poetry. One is always being absorbed by the whole circumstance. So I don't have a chronological situation where I did this at that age or that age. This whole idea of Rimbaud, he retired at 19. But how many people can get to that level at that early age? Philip Lamantia did, 15, David Gascoigne did. But it's rare. It's rare. Who wants to read a 10-year-old's understanding, his lucubrations? At 10, he probably doesn't have any lucubrations, or her. They want to play. This did I, but it just turned out this way.
No memory of your friendship in California?
Yeah, I'm just, Christina wants me to say something because I told her we were friends in California when we both were in Southern California.
Sure.
And I was commuting up to LA a lot, and we had Douglas Messerly at Sun and Moon Books was both of ours editor. And there was a kind of scene there that I don't know if it still goes on, but it was a very intense group of poets. in LA of all places. And I've always wondered, was it just a moment, like for 5 years or something, that everybody came together or?
Well, it was. It was on one level, but for me, it has extended itself
Yeah.
to the present moment. But I found that was a nourishing hive at that time. You know, Douglas published my one of my early books, Asia and Haiti.
Right.
And, you know, it's continued to last. In fact, a reprint is coming out from Litmus Press next year. So, in other words, I'm talking about an essence that one is involved with across time. It's not a special time, but an extended time. You know, it's far beyond where the trail starts, and it doesn't end. But it enriches, the poetry enriches you as you live.
It, for me, was a special, enclosed time living in Southern California.
It was very special visiting you, like we used to visit on, you know, I'd come across, we'd hang out Friday evenings in the house on, I think it was Sycamore.
Good for you.
I remember that.
That was it.
Yeah,
And my daughter, Danzy, was...
Nancy, yeah, that was great. And Dancy, I just met Dancy some months ago over at USC.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's doing great.
So she has stayed, and my son has stayed in California.
Yes.
But mine was sort of a drop, and then I came back.
Yeah.
So but you're very much a part of my feelings about that period. And the ones, as you say, that saved my life were around Douglas and all of you there.
It was a fantastic time. Very, very frenetic and very, how can I say, very, it was fulminant. It was, in that sense, it was life-giving and full of light and power and energy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I'm on my knees. Anyone? Okay. Tongo, you want to do one last speculation?
What is the meaning of life?
There are people that know way more than I do, but the fact is that there's no real meaning. It's the experience that one carries across time. And I think one has to work on life every day. With not an attitude, but an involvement. Mm-hmm. You know, the involvement creates one's grain and one's ground, you know, that you've got to go through. And it's not always easy. But, you know, I've been in bus stations at 3:30 in the morning, taking a Greyhound somewhere and watching distracted children play at pinball machines, violent games at pinball machines. You know, in China, this gentleman from this, Matthew Arrett, he was talking about from the red blossoming movement in Montreal. I can't think of the institute he works at, but he's talking about what goes on in China. The kids basically want to be astronauts. They don't want to play at pinball machines. Kind of maturity of essence that we don't have. And I'm not coming up with an ideological statement, but we don't have that, you know, because here the commercials are overwhelming. You turn on TV and everything's about somebody that's sick or is taking what do they call it, whatever they call for skin or this or that. But what about internally? That's what I learned about the Egyptian system. They call it, in the language at that time, Gosei, but it's Luxor, where the individuals were not graded, but accrued in terms of internal growth from the inner outer. And subjects were taught not in terms of grading, but in terms of wisdom. And that's something that was going on, and it was Dario Hikma in the the Islamic Middle Ages, which is interesting. They took that as a symbol. And you find that, when Schwaller de Lubitz talks, it's a non-quantitative way of learning. So this is the way I've absorbed in a non-quantitative state. So it's a struggle, though, because you don't know where you're going to turn up at. You really don't. Fortunately, I'm here.
But it's working.
It's working.
We can do a lot better than that.